Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the listener-supported Wednesdays with Watson podcast. It is June of 2022. I cannot believe it's June. And we are in it's crazy. We are in a series on racial trauma, specifically, though, as it pertains to trauma in the Black and Brown communities. This podcast, as any of you know, have listened to the 60-plus episodes, you know that we have a mission. That mission is to provide access to help. We are doing that through education. We have interviews with doctors and therapists. I've written blogs on research. I'm a freelance writer for the CPTSD Foundation, and stories like you're going to hear today. But most importantly, the mission here is introducing you to Jesus, who we believe is the star of the story and does all things well. Before we step into today's interview, I want y'all to understand something. I don't know what the guest is going to tell us. I realize that tackling a topic like this is difficult, dare I say risky, but I feel like it is part of the mission of this podcast to help listeners understand all trauma and how that they can provide support. And some people listening to this podcast today will even have some Me Too moments. Today, I welcome TJ McKnight to the show. TJ is a fellow podcaster and friend. My favorite thing about him, though, is he is jealous for the souls of Jesus. He will tell us about that ministry towards the end of the podcast, but I want you to welcome TJ McKnight to the podcast. Welcome, TJ.
Thank you, Amy. I am excited to be here, and I'm extremely humbled and honored to just be a part of your podcast. When you asked me to do this a while back, I was like, man, this is crazy. I'm hoping that I say something that is, beneficial and edifying for the body. And it's also enlightening and educational as well. So thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. Like I said, I know that it's dicey. And as a white person, I am struggling with vernacular. And so to those of you listening out there, particularly those of you that will know when TJ's podcast, when his episode drops, when people who do not look like me, and then this is what I mean by the vernacular. People who are not white when they listen to this. I want you to understand that I feel like this is a risk worth taking because I believe that all trauma matters, and that is what this podcast is about. And so, before we get into that, I sent the questions ahead just because everybody knows me, and we'll be here for 3 hours if I didn't have some sort of structure. But in season 3, the icebreaker question that I decided to use has been one of the most enriching questions that I've asked and now almost 4 seasons of this podcast. Because the guests have told me, when you sent me the questions, all the other ones were easy, but this first question was, wow, that was hard for an icebreaker question. But it's been super cathartic for me. So TJ, my listeners want to know, they know the first question is going to be, what is your favorite thing about how God made you?
Oh man, my favorite thing about how God made me is just how, how the Bible says you're fearfully and wonderfully made. I love the fact that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And not only that, but I am made in the image of God. And even though we're talking about racial trauma and race, we're tackling this tough subject of race. I wholeheartedly believe that all of us, regardless of our skin pigmentations, regardless of our backgrounds or who we are all created in the image of God. The Bible says that He created them in His image. He created us in His image. And that's what I wholeheartedly believe. I love that. I love that He has created me to be the individual that I am. Like you, you put it so eloquently when you was kind of talking about me or introducing me. Jealous after the souls of God, and it's so humbling to hear those things. But I always consider myself as a nobody. But at the same time, it's who I am. It's who I strive to be. Not trying to, be anything other than who God has created me to be. And I love that. I love God wholeheartedly.
Yes,
I have a deep passion for God. So, and for the things
I
of
would
God
love
and
to
for the
take
things
credit
of
for
His
that.
kingdom.
Jealous for the souls of Jesus. I stole that from a friend of mine who will probably listen to this, but you are jealous for the souls of Jesus. And I love that answer because we mention a lot on this podcast, Genesis 1:26, which we got 26
Hmm.
verses into the Bible before God had reminded us who we were and that he made us in his
Hmm.
own image. And then we also mention quite frequently Psalm 139, which you just referenced, and fearfully and wonderfully made, that he knew us in the innermost parts before the foundations
Hmm.
of the world. And so
Hmm.
to identify that as one of your favorite things about how God made you is to really honor the creator, right? It's like,
Hmm.
what's my favorite thing about this plate? Well, my daughter made it for me. And so I
Hmm.
love that answer, and by far probably one of my favorite answers of the entire.
Oh,
Yeah, I love
that's dope.
yeah, probably one of my favorite answers. Well, so we are in a series this season 3 where we are talking about trauma, spaces, places, and ACEs. We started the series out with ACEs and talking about the Enneagram and trauma and how God made us and how we deal with trauma based on how God made us. And then we moved into the places and spaces, which was childhood trauma in the home. And so I began to educate my listeners about things that we call adverse childhood experiences. And just like in the name, there are experiences that we have as children that are adverse, that affects us later in life. And I sent these to you earlier and asked if you were comfortable in answering these questions as we move towards our goal of talking about racial trauma. And so this doesn't necessarily need to have happened in your home, even though we are focusing on childhood trauma in the home. Right now, we're focusing on childhood trauma and these adverse childhood experiences. And I'm going to tell you what that means after you've answered the questions. And so just a simple yes or no, and then we'll talk a little bit more. So from 0 to 18, did you experience physical abuse,
No,
sexual abuse,
no.
verbal abuse?
You said outside of the home?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay. And any of these outside the home, by the way. Physical neglect?
Um, I would say yes and no.
That's a hard one. How about emotional?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely emotional neglect. Yeah.
How about a family member with mental illness?
Um, yes. I
How
had to
about a
think on
family
that one.
member?
Yes.
How about a family member addicted to substances?
Yes.
A family member in prison?
Not immediate, but yes, I did have a family member who was in prison.
How about domestic violence?
Wow. Yes.
Okay. So adverse childhood experiences were these 10 questions that
Hmm.
experts a long time ago came up with that they identified, particularly that domestic violence question that I asked you, particularly if it's against your mother, it will adversely affect you later in life. Experts say
Hmm.
that if you have 3 to 4 of these adverse childhood experiences, that you as a child, and until it is dealt with, are under what's called toxic stress, and it will present itself in other ways in your body and in your spirit
Hmm.
and in your life and in relationally and all of those things. And so adverse childhood experiences are important in the concept of this conversation because some of those adverse childhood experiences could or could not be racial trauma. But what I want my listeners to know is that I'm sitting across the screen from somebody who gets it, right? There are some of those people out there, though I've not had an interview yet with an adverse childhood experience score of fewer than 3. Now, obviously, it's a trauma podcast. So, but I didn't know this
Hmm.
about you. I don't know anything about you except for how much I adore you and respect you as a fellow podcaster and brother in Christ. But I didn't know this about you. And so you've got a relatively high adverse childhood experience score, somewhere between 5 and 6. And so the
Mm.
fact that you are breathing air is a miracle.
It's a blessing.
Yeah, it's a blessing. Exactly. But it does cause us problems, and I'm sure relationally or physically or sometime in your life when we hit end on the end of this podcast, you're going to think, oh, I remember this and how that affected this and this and this, and decisions that we make sometimes are bad as a result of these
Hmm.
adverse childhood experiences. Like, I'll give you a great example. I am a domestic violence survivor. I have an adverse childhood experience score of 9. I married
Wow.
somebody, stayed in a domestic violence marriage for 12 years. So I just made bad decision after bad decision after bad decision because of that toxic stress. And so I think it's important in the concept of this conversation, because we're going to be talking about little TJ, teenage TJ, and those things. And I want people to know who I'm talking to. So obviously I do want to thank you again. I feel like I can't say it enough for being here, because we are focusing on racial trauma. I recognize that that my community can never understand the the experiences that your community experiences, just on an everyday basis, especially as a male who probably as a young age was taught how to put his hand on the steering wheel when a police officer. Okay, no, that's the one that all the white people know. You're going to tell us something that all the white people don't know, but I do recognize that my community, we could never experience some of the trauma that you've experienced, both in this generation and way generations back, all the way back to whether we're talking African roots, Caribbean roots, or wherever. Trauma among Black and brown people, the entire continent of Asia is prevalent and has been and will continue to be until we continue to do things like this to fix it. For my listeners, as I mentioned to you, I don't know what TJ is going to tell me, but I'm wondering, can you give us an example of a trauma that your community experiences that mine never could?
Man, so off the bat, I think the biggest for me was, and I'm going to talk about like maybe childhood TJ into teenage TJ. Kind of piggybacking off of your police reference, my mom would tell me all the time, speak proper, speak up, sit up when you're talking to an adult, and, have respect for your elders and people in authority. And so, when I was a teenager, I was an idiot, but I used to race a lot. I didn't have a car fit for racing, put it that way. So I had a 95 Mitsubishi Galant, but I used to race the mess out of that car. But I would always get in trouble with, like, I would get pulled over all the time. And even when I had my Galant to when I upgraded to, which is crazy, I upgraded to like a 2005 Nissan Altima. It was all white with black tint, like you cannot see through the tint. It was a beautiful car in my opinion. It was a stick shift. I would race in that car as well. So, getting to that, I remember I would always get pulled over by the cops, just always. And I remember my mom, even as a kid, as a child, she would tell me, and she would actually demonstrate it whenever she would get pulled over by a cop, how I was to act, whenever we were pulled over by a cop. And you could always kind of gauge the type of responses that you would get based on the race of that cop. I remember one incident where my mom, when she was pulled over, funny story, she was pulled over, we was on our way to church. We was already running late. We had some fried chicken in the back because she was in charge of bringing fried chicken. And she was blasting her gospel music. We were blasting, gospel music going down the road, backcountry road. Didn't see the police officer, just ran past him. And he pulled out behind her, and we saw blue lights. Immediately, fear came across all of us. She was just, oh my gosh, what do we do? I'm looking at my mom through the rearview mirror because I'm sitting in the back seat. My sister's sitting in the front, and we're looking at her, and she was like, all right, y'all just be quiet. I'll handle this, and and we're just kind of calm down. And as she rolled down the window, the officer walked up to the car. He was Black, and he heard the song that my mama was playing. Ironically, he was Black, he was a Christian, and he was listening to the exact same radio station and the exact same song. And so he walked up and he gave a joke saying, hey, you're listening to the song, you're getting, caught up in the spirit, and, you're driving fast. What's going on? And when he came and he said that kind of, decompressed our level of stress. It put us at ease. Like, okay, we can now, engage this man as a regular human being. And I remember when he went back to his car and he came back and was asking us where we were going. I'm gonna say we're on our way to church. I'm already running late. And she said, I have some fried chicken in the back. You want a piece? So, right. So she's bribing the officer with fried chicken. Probably illegal. But he was but he was like, no, ma'am, I won't take it. But he let us off with a warning. And I remember that vividly because that was one of the moments where my mom had that talk with us, and she was just saying how you want to present yourself as a young Black person in this context. And then my mom would tell me all the time, she's, God rest her soul, I love her so much. She would tell me all the time, you're Black, you already have 2 strikes against you. You're Black and you're male. And most people see you as a threat. They're just waiting to give you that 3rd strike so that they can count you out. So always live your life thinking that you have those 2 strikes and that you're always about to hit that 3rd strike at any time. And that helped kind of shape how I navigated and how I did things with people. And so going back to my police reference, I remember one time I got pulled over, and it was very scary, this particular instance, because we were just leaving the hospital. My mom was in the hospital at the time. We were just leaving the hospital. I wasn't racing, but I believe I had a reputation for racing, but I wasn't racing or anything like that. It was just, we was coming down the road. I saw the police officer get behind me. But what I did was he got close to my bumper. I'm thinking that he's trying to get past. So I turn my blinkers on and get into the next lane. He gets behind me and turn the blue lights on. I'm like, oh gosh, what did I do? And so I pulled into a school, and I'm approached by this female officer. She was really nice. She was really kind. I was, kind of talking myself out of the ticket with her. But her male counterpart, who was a white male officer, he was very much more aggressive. And I believe he was maybe like her training officer or whatnot. Because I could tell that there was some, tension back and forth between the two. And I remember this vividly. My sister, she pulls up because she was behind me, but she was maybe like 5 minutes off. And she saw that I was pulled over. She comes in full blazing. Y'all let my brother go. She's yelling out the window. We just leaving the hospital. My mom is in the hospital, and everything she's saying is like, accounting my story. She's confirming my story. And I just remember the white male officer put his hand on his gun. He's yelling at her, telling her, go get away, go park over there. We got this. And I'm just sitting there kind of stunned and he's yelling at her. She's yelling at him. My sister is kind of crazy, but she could tell she's my older sister. She's very protective. She's a fierce protector, but she's telling him he's a good kid and it don't have to go down like this. And I'm just, kind of stuck in the middle. And I just remember pretty much how that story ends is the female officer just lets me go with the warning. And come to find out, I knew what the issue was with my tags. The reason why she pulled me over, she was saying it was my tags. I had just got a new car, but I had my old tags on the plate on the car. And I remember having that conversation with the dealer when I bought the car. I was like, hey, these are old tags. It was like, you'll be fine. You just leave them on there until you get your new tags. And it just so happened, ironically, my new tags did come in that day, but they were on the refrigerator at the house.
Good place for them.
And I didn't have, great place for them. But I didn't have time to switch them out because, we had to immediately get to the hospital. There was a lot of things going on. And I was explaining that to them. She was, I said, the female officer, she was very receptive. She was understanding. But the male officer was very aggressive. He wasn't, I don't know if he was on something that day, but he wasn't getting it. And as I explained it to them, and I told them, hey, my sister can go to the house and grab the tags for you if it's that, serious, so that you guys can see that I'm not lying. They believed the story and it was like, you're good to go. But it's those type of incidences that, that kind of, always kind of left a bad taste in my mouth with regards to police officers and how they deal with things. Yes, I had one cop who was respectful and was doing her job, and then I have another cop who was just blatantly doing his own thing. And it always kind of left that, I would say, yeah, it always kind of left that negative impression on me, because I know that there are good cops out there. And I can speak for this as a whole for all Black people. We know that there are good cops out there, but we also know that there is a remnant of bad ones that are like tainting the entire police force. It's just like the analogy, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. And that's exactly what we're seeing. And when you have that, you're promoting a distrust between the communities. And Durham, North Carolina is notorious for not having we're notorious for just like always having in the news for shootings, and just it's a great city, but at the same time it's a dangerous city. And the community relationship, or I would say the relationship between the community and the police, has not always been great. So just to kind of experience that as a teenager, and oftentimes throughout, it kind of always kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. But then, there was one instance, and I can't say that this is, as all police are bad, because there was one instance when I would say this, not all white male police officers are bad, because there was one instance where I was pulled over by a white male police officer, and I explained to him like, hey, I'm rushing and I ran this red light because my mom is sick. I'm going home and I'm just getting here from college. And he understood that, and he let me go with the warning. And he was very respectful. He was saying, hey, next time, just make sure that you slow down, take your time. He was giving me advice. I know that there's good cops, but we also acknowledge the fact that there are bad cops. So.
Well, and that we're still having this conversation, right? So we're still having this conversation 20, 30, 35 years later. Let me tell you, I've been pulled over so many times in the state of Florida for speeding that I have maxed out, and I maxed this out about 15 years ago. I maxed out the amount of times that I could go to driver improvement school, but never once as a
Wow.
white, I have a heavy foot. I got places to be, TJ. I got places to be. But as a white female, I can't comprehend. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and it wasn't in the prep, but it was just occurring to me as you were talking. Two questions. I'm going to ask them in two separate parts. The first question is, do you, as an adult, struggle with any sort of bitterness / resentment? Like, I am a precious son of the Most High King. We talked about fearfully and wonderfully made and made in the image of God, but yet we're still having conversations, and I'm going to ask you about your children in a second, but we're still having to tell, and the police reference comes up because it is the one that we're seeing the most. We've seen it. We saw it for 9 minutes with George Floyd. We could go on and on and on, say their names, say their names, say their names. And so I'm looking across the screen of a college-educated Christian man who loves his family and who loves the Lord. But yet, if you were to leave this interview and get in your car and drive across town, you still have something in your head that I don't like. I got to be careful because I'm a Black male, and the assumption is they want to give me that third strike. Do you struggle at all with bitterness or resentment against God for that? I guess is my first question, or against just life in general, or do you just kind of like, you know what, this is the way it is, and so I don't even think about it.
I don't resent God for this. I really don't. I think that, when you resent God for something that He created, you're putting yourself in a bad place, because you're telling God that, what you did wasn't good enough, but we also have to understand that there is sin in the world. And so everybody who is a Christian, you have to recognize that there are good people and there are bad people. And at the same time, sin is still running rampant in the world. There are Christians, there are non-Christians. There are people who are Christians who are great people, and there are Christians who are still sinning and are bad people. But the fact of the matter is they're still Christians. Yeah. I'm not going to sit here and be like, hey, I'm hating all people because of how they treat me, or I'm hating God because of how His people are treating me. No, that means that I'm exalting myself above a higher standard, or thinking that I'm better than God when this is what God created. You know, he created this earth to be a certain way. But because of the fall of Adam and Eve in Genesis 3, you know, here we are dealing with the ramifications of sin,
Right.
dealing with everything that comes from it. So no, I don't resent God for going through some of these things. I can see how some people could if their faith was kind of attached to it. But I know that my faith is set on a firm foundation, which is the word of God. It's not, I didn't come to God off of some emotional appeal or some, you know, crazy story. No, my foundation was set when I was a kid. I got saved when I was 8. And from the time I was 8 to the time that I would say 23, yeah, I lived it up and I did my own thing, but my foundation was always there when I was 8. And I'll never be angry with God because of how other people react to certain things or how other people treat me.
Do you struggle with when you see things like George Floyd? And I've not been able to investigate the school shooting in Texas enough today to know whether or not, I would imagine that there was a huge Hispanic community in that church.
Yeah.
Do you struggle? So not necessarily with bitterness or resentment, but can you help listeners out there, especially male listeners, understand how you navigate the day-to-day? Like, you know what, this sucks, but this is the way it is. I walk out of my house, I get in my car, I'm a target.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? And I'm going to, part 2 of that question is, you said you have 3 children. I know 2 of them are school age. Either of them boys?
I have 2 boys and 1 girl.
Okay, so you have 2 boys and 1 girl. So we're reliving this. You're having the same conversation with your own kids. Does that make you feel some kind of way that you still have to do that?
From a humanistic standpoint, yes, that does make me feel some kind of way that I have to have these conversations with my children. But I would say I hate to say religious standpoint, but from that perspective with God, I don't resent God for that. I'm big on accountability, you know, holding people accountable for the things that they do. God is the chief accountable person. Like he holds us accountable to his standard. If we're not living up to his standard, that's that. And so when you see all these different type of things going on, even as a man, I always err on the side of God. You know, what would God think about these things? What would God do? And even when I'm leaving the house or I'm going out and about and I'm doing all these different things, there is always that. There's always that notion in the back of my mind as a Black male is like, at any point this can go sideways. And so I always try to make sure that I carry myself in a certain way. And this is another thing that maybe you know, maybe some people don't know, but you know, it's like we have to shed layers of who we truly are to become another person in the public eye, because we want to be perceived as such. And I remember, all growing up and just even, I would say up until maybe like a couple of years ago, you know, I would always kind of present myself in a upstanding manner so that I don't perceive to be a threat to anyone. But as I got older and things in life kind of happened, you know, I'm at the place now where it's like, I shouldn't have to do that if I'm just being myself. I should just be myself at all times. No, I'm not a threat to nobody. I don't present myself as a threat, but it goes back to what my mom was telling me all the time. You know, you have those 2 stripes, you're Black and you're a male. And then now let's add this to it. I'm Black, I'm male, and I'm 6'2", 200 plus pounds. And then I have muscles and stuff. It's like, you're always going to be perceived as a threat. And so that's one of the reasons why, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking like, how can I approach certain things, certain conversations, certain things, certain people? Because I already know you see me as a threat. Even with like my hair like it is and everything like that. You may perceive me as a threat. I consider myself as the most gentle giant. I'm the nicest person that anybody will probably ever meet. But at the same time, not everybody will receive that. Not everybody will see that when they see me, because they may see me, or they're like, oh, that's another black kid, or another thug or whatever. No, like, I'm college educated. I have 2 degrees. I have a master's in information technology and information systems and technology management. And I'm big on religion. Like,
Yeah. Well,
I'm a licensed minister.
you love Jesus and you love people, and
Yeah.
so, but I do want to recognize something for you, and I want to recognize it for you and for your 2 sons, and for my listeners out there, is I recognize how exhausting that has to be, right?
Yeah.
Because I wake up and I'm Amy. I'm not a danger to anybody. You're not a danger to anybody, but people don't look at me a certain way. They don't make assumptions about me. With the exception of being a white male, being a white female is the best demographic to be in this country. And that makes me very sad. And it kind of leads me into something else I only would have asked from a friend, because what we find and what we found is white people, particularly after the George Floyd thing, mainly because we were all locked in our houses and we got on apps like Clubhouse and started talking to each other. White people, even though I grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly black, most of my friends were black. I never got in a fight because I knew if somebody was going to beat me up, I was going to have all of my black friends with me. And so I understand kind of the community, but I don't understand being any of these things, like somebody looking at me going, you're a danger because you look different. I live in a county in Florida where if we see a black person, it's like, like a unicorn. It literally is like a unicorn. Right. And so after the George Floyd thing happened, and after we were all locked in our houses and on Clubhouse and holding rooms and all the things, I began to the Amy Watson in me that started this podcast, and the Amy Watson in me that writes and does the things that helps people with trauma. I want to fix it. And I very quickly in some Clubhouse rooms realized that there was a better way to ask for that. And so I do not want to come across as like some white savior complex to you. I want to come across, and you're looking at me on Zoom and my listeners are hear the authenticity in my voice. I want to know, and I want to ask somebody who won't get offended and who will assume that I really want to make a difference. I want this microphone to be a megaphone for a message that a white person can help, right? And so how can white people help mitigate some of the damages of trauma in the black community? How do we earn the trust? And how do I learn without asking the victims, if you will, to be my professor? I don't know any other way, TJ, than to ask somebody, what can white people do?
Well, the first thing is like what you said. Don't come in and try to be a savior. Just listen. Don't listen with the intent of trying to fix something. Listen with the intent of just listening. Fully hearing what somebody is saying, fully hearing what we're explaining. I know for me, that is one of the biggest things for me, is just listening with the intent to just listen. If I tell you who I am, or I tell you about a situation, or I tell you about an issue, immediately, and I've had this conversation before with a white friend of mine. Immediately, they're thinking, well, this is how we have to fix this and this, that, and the other. I'm going to handle this. I'm going to talk to them. No, just listen. Just listen. Because it's so easy to try to think of solutions and think of things immediately. But sometimes the solution isn't always present. Sometimes the solution is very hard to get to, because if it's a systemic issue about racism and it's been going on generationally, yes, there are practices and things that you can do now, small things, small changes, as Matthew McConaughey has said earlier, small sacrifices that we can make to change the perspective or change the generational errors that we've done. yeah, that can be done. But if I'm saying this is one of the biggest issues that I've had, and I know I'm kind of going off left a little bit here with the George Floyd situation, that heightened everything. One of the things that I was saying, and I know a lot of Black people are saying, is that diversity needs to be seen, needs to be felt. One of the biggest things that I work for. I won't say a Fortune 500 company, but I work for one of the top 5 banks in the country. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, we don't want to just be included with every type of thing that's diverse, okay? If we're saying diversity and inclusion, or we want to be included in these things, we want to be recognized as Black people just as equal as white people. It doesn't mean that you have to include us with, okay, let's include y'all with the homosexuals. Let's include y'all in with the Asians. Let's include y'all with all of these minorities. No, because each and every one of those minority individuals want their own individualized respect. When you look on the board of directors for so many of these companies, I can even target Facebook and look at Facebook in and of itself. They say that they are a diverse company, but they don't have a Black person that look like me sitting on their board. They may have an Asian or an Indian or someone like that, and that makes them diverse, but they don't have a Black person like me sitting on their board, giving them, giving them advice or advising on these things. Or, I mean, I'm not saying that you have to be me in general, but, somebody that is well qualified to sit in that role, and that is not just singling out Facebook, but singling out a lot of these companies, because it's like that across the board. There are companies that are making progress towards that. But one of the issues that I had with a lot of companies is that they reacted in a way of wanting to fix instead of just listening. Because the biggest error that I don't know the company that was behind Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's rice and all that stuff. The biggest issue is we didn't want y'all to change all of those different things. Like, we just wanted to be heard. That's all. Nobody wanted Aunt Jemima to be taken off of the pancake box. Like, we like Aunt Jemima. Like, if it was an issue with Aunt Jemima's whatever, if she was a slave, then change her shirt, change something, like, make her look like somebody's aunt, like not like somebody, a house Negro at the time. Right. Like, if that was the case, then do that, make it relatable. But that's not what we wanted. We didn't want you to just go away with Aunt Jemima. Now you have Pearl Mining Company. What is Pearl Mining Company? We don't know. Like, my wife made this reference. Like, we don't even know what it is. We're like, I don't even buy it anymore. I just go straight to
the first time I've heard. That's literally the first time I've heard the rename.
Yeah. And it's like, you see all of this and you're like, that's not the response that we wanted. That's not the response that we were talking about. If you're talking about police brutality, you're talking about racial discrimination, you're talking about racial inequity, you're talking about all of these different race things. The solution isn't to immediately fix these things like this. No, the solution is to get to the root of this cause and fix the root of the issue. Because if you fix the root, everything else from that, just like with a tree, if you fix the root of a tree and that tree is cut off, it will spring back up and it'll be beautiful and full like it should be. And so if we get to the root of what the issues are, if you have somebody that is sitting in a seat of judgment on a home mortgage, and they determine whether or not you approve of this mortgage or not, based on your credit score or based on the factors of that, let that be the case. Don't let it be because I'm Black. Right. Don't let it be because I'm this or I'm that. Like, no. If I have the capital and I have the credit and I have all these different things, base it off of that, just like you would do your white counterpart in these situations. And so I know that it's kind of like all over the place, but actually, that is my biggest thing.
Yeah, no, it's not all over the place. And you taught me something, because I'm a fixer. And I think the 9-minute knee on George Floyd's jugular vein did it to all of us, right? But as human beings immediately want to go into fix it mode. And I did that in some clubhouse rooms. Like I got on, and really got educated, for lack of a better way to explain it, of how to interact with a group of people who historically, and you talk about the root. Here's the root of the problem. And here, and anybody that listens to my podcast is not going to be surprised to hear this come out of my mouth. But here's the root of the problem. We as a society for hundreds of years have not valued Black and brown people for the image bearers that they are. We sometimes forget that in one of the original drafts of the Constitution that a Black person was considered, it was either 2/5 or 3/5 of a human being. And so for you to say to me, we didn't want Aunt Jemima to go out, and there's lots of things that happened too. They took at Disney, they took Splash Mountain out. I didn't that was so old that I didn't even know that had anything to do with racism. And so for you to tell me, we need you guys to stop fixing it, thinking that that's going to make you feel better and that's going to placate you for representing a group of people that has ostracized us and not valued us for hundreds and hundreds of years. If Amy Watson as a white person can look at TJ McKnight as a Black person and know that you are the precious son of the Most High God, that you're the Genesis 1:26 image bearer, then the best thing that we can do for somebody is give them our time, and we give them our time when we listen. And so listeners out there, we all want to fix this, but we are not going to fix in even a decade or 2 decades, hundreds of years of racial trauma. I think that the practice, that the gift of presence is so important. Having conversations like this is important. Listening, trying to really feel in my body what it must feel like to be pulled out of a car. And you didn't say this happened to you, but it does happen to Black males who get pulled out of the car with handcuffs on. I want to hear you and listen to what you're not saying when you say I have 2 boys that you're having to have these same conversations with. And so I think it comes down to a value issue, and it comes down to human beings needing to understand that we are all made in the image of God, and that the ultimate diversity and inclusivity happened when God created man. He created us all in his own image. And so it comes down to a value issue. And so those of us that want to help, the answer to that question is those of us that want to help, guys, let's just listen. Because I know that when we are listened to, we feel loved. When we feel loved, we feel less insecure. When we feel less insecure, we can navigate through some of these unfair feelings. And so I had a podcast guest that came on that said, if you want to know why the fruit looks like it looks, look at the fruit. So if we've got a bunch of African-American males running around this country creating crimes, Black on Black crime, all the things that are true, look at the roots. And we can fix the roots by nourishing them, by reminding that we need to value those roots. We need to love those roots. We need to hear those roots. We need to see those roots. And we need to just remember that these are human beings that we're talking to. And so the gift of time and the gift of listening is incredible. And so we have 3 C's as we kind of end here. We have 3 C's in our podcast, and I would just love for you to tell us how they play a role in your life, and more particularly for listeners out there, how they can play a role in us navigating generational trauma. The first one is church. Now, let me tell you something. I will pick a Black church every day of the week over a white church because y'all are way cooler than us. Take care of your own. I've learned things by listening from some of my friends, my Black friends on Clubhouse, about how churches have church mothers, things that our churches don't have. But tell us, in your opinion, how the church kept you really on the straight and narrow, even though you like to race, and all of that. But given that you dealt with racial trauma, that you have an adverse childhood experience score that's significantly high, how did the church play into and invest in your life so that what I'm looking across on the screen right now is an amazing human being with a wife and kids?
Mm-hmm. The church played a huge, significant role in my life because, that's where I can say that I found my identity, not just in Christ, but in who I am. Not only did I find my identity, but I found my community. I found that I was valued and I was worth something. I found out that I was gifted. I had gifts. I found that I could be somebody, or the smallest achievements in my life, were celebrated. It's those type of things that that made me who I am. It shaped me. When my mom was sick with cancer in 1998, the first time, the church responded. When we went through a lot, of financial issues or whatever, the church responded. There were times in my life when I can, point to how the church helped mold and shape me, but we'll be here all day, talking about that.
Well, and you brought in that other C, community, which is so important.
Yeah.
And so for listeners,
it is.
It really is. The community say the church. I have these 3 C's because they were a huge part of my healing, right? And my trauma just looks different. It just looks different. But the church and community are 2 vital components, in my opinion, to healing.
Yeah.
I love that you said that the church gave you your identity not only in Christ, as we see in 1 Peter 2:9, where the Bible says that we are a chosen people, a royal priesthood. And God has called us out of the darkness into this marvelous light. That verse doesn't say, hey, all white people, you are a chosen royal priesthood. And by the way, our faith was founded in the Middle East where nobody looked like either one of us. And so that's just,
right.
that was free. The last C is counseling. And I want to do a little call to action here before I ask you this question, because this is a passion of mine and is a reason that I am sitting here proclaiming Christ and Christ alone, because of church, because of community, but because of counseling. And I was really fortunate to be able to afford to go to counseling. I realized that not everybody can afford to go to counseling, particularly in marginalized communities. And so the Wednesdays with Watson podcast at the end of last year raised money, and the first X amount of money went towards the production of the podcast, because I'm not Joe Rogan. I don't have advertisers. I'm not getting rich on this podcast. And so I had people that came in and completely funded the podcast for 2022 for production costs. And then all the money that is donated after that goes to scholarships for pro bono counseling. And I have already established 2 of those. One of them was in the name of Cheryl Rice, who was a really good friend of mine, who took me to the psych ward when I attempted to take my life. And the second one will be announced on a podcast. Actually, it was on the podcast that dropped today, to Simone Lachey, who is of a sound mind. She is a Black female living with bipolar disorder. And so counseling is a big deal to me. And this podcast, the reason why I do it, besides the fact that I like to hear myself talk, is to raise money for pro bono counseling. And so that is the call to action, guys. If you're interested in that mission and to help us fund pro bono counseling, in the show notes, if you hit contact Amy, there are 2 ways you can do that. One is called Buy Me a Cup of Coffee, which is lame, but it gives you the opportunity to do a one-time gift. And then the second is Patreon, which are for those of you who are interested in maybe a monthly support. I've got a $5 option there. All of that money goes to Joel 225 Ministries, which is my soon to be newly formed 501c3 that will fund pro bono counseling. Now, I stuck that call to action in the middle of the question so that people would listen to it. Talk to me about counseling. Has counseling been part of your story as we talk about some of these things? You've mentioned your mom being ill several times. That's a big deal, particularly when she was so instrumental in who you are today. Has counseling been part of your story, whether it's racial trauma or not? Has counseling been part of your story?
Yes. It's funny because I've been eager to get back to counseling because I was like, I need to talk to somebody about a lot of the stuff that
Yeah.
that I go through.
Mhm.
But I remember vividly back when 9/11 happened. I dealt with a serious bout of depression, um, and I was 11 years old. So my birthday is September 8th, and 9/11 occurred 3 days later. And so and I had just turned 11. So, seeing that really unfold and just seeing people jumping out of the windows of the Twin Towers. And, as an 11-year-old kid, in my mind, and growing up in church, you hear all the time, about heaven and hell and death and stuff. So, all of that was weighing heavy on my mind. And I just remember talking to my mom, was like, and she was constantly praying over me, and like I know I probably drove her crazy during that time because I was driving myself crazy because it was certain songs I couldn't listen to. Like it's this one song called "Be Encouraged." I believe it's by William Beckton. And in the end of the song, he would say, "Even to the end of the world," basically saying that God said, Jesus said He'll be with you even to the end of the world. They used to scare me because I'm like, I don't want to think about the end of the world. I just want to go home and play with my toys. Like,
Yeah,
I just want to
exactly.
play with my friends. Like, I want my mom and my dad. Like, as a kid, that kind of, it traumatizes you. But, when I was in school, one of the counselors noticed that, my behavior was a little different. My mom was telling her what was going on, and she pulled me aside. So if anyone who's listening and was wondering why I was missing some days in middle school, this was why. She pulled me aside and we sat down and we talked about what was going on, and she helped me navigate through some of those feelings that I was going through, navigate through what I was dealing with. And she worked with me for about a month, and it was a good month and some change, I believe. And I remember, my school, shout out to Kepler Heights, and Miss Chisholm, who was there and it was helping me. But, my school was very big on making sure that everybody was seen and taken care of. And my school was a very small charter school, so everybody knew everybody. And so for them to really take that notice and offer me those counseling sessions with a guidance counselor, not well yeah with the counselor within our school, it was helpful because it helped me to overcome what I was thinking, overcome my fears. And when I came out of that depression, I stood up in church and gave a testimony and said how the Lord delivered me from it. It's very serious. It's something that I feel is not utilized enough. And I say that because, I want counseling for some things, and I haven't done it. But I know that, a lot of the issues, a lot of the problems in life, or a lot of I would say the big incidences that took place even recently, with the school shooting. A lot of that probably could have been avoided if those individuals sought real counseling and good counseling. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, and he was telling me about how he had bad counseling and how that almost drove him over the edge. And I just think about, it's important to get good holistic counseling. I know this is Christian based. I will even put the plug in. Good Christian counseling if you're a Christian, or if you feel that maybe you like somebody that's not Christian, it's not Christian based. Just get good counseling, because it's very needed in this day and age. Mental health is so serious, and I hate that the church kind of downplays it so much.
Yeah.
It hurts my heart, but it's something that is very real and is very prevalent in this day and age. And it seems that so many people are dealing with mental health issues this day and age that they're scared to say anything about it
Right.
because of the fear of being looked at as crazy or something like that. But it's not crazy if you're getting help.
Right.
It's not crazy if it's saving your life.
and it does save lives, right? And so for those of you
Mm-hmm.
listening, particularly for those of you listening for the racial trauma portion of it, you know, it's important to attack that early. So if your
Mm-hmm.
children saw the George Floyd thing, or you cannot turn on the news and not hear it. Counseling is biblical. The Bible
Yes.
says, in the multitude of counselors there is great wisdom. And
Mm-hmm.
so go get counseling. I do, though, understand, in the context of a conversation of racial trauma, again, this was an assumption I made in a clubhouse room that got me in a lot of trouble, so I don't want to make the assumption, but I do know that across the board, but because we're talking about racial trauma, that resources aren't often there for counsel,
Mm-hmm.
for people to get counseling. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was telling somebody in a podcast interview today, I turned 50 in December, and on my 50th birthday, I told the Lord, I want to raise $1 million for pro bono counseling. And that
Mm-hmm.
might seem crazy, but you better believe I'm going to do it, because that's how important I believe counseling is. Well, TJ, you have
Mm-hmm.
been remarkable here today. I think the big takeaway for me, as I hear you talk about basically living as a Black man, and then obviously raising two Black sons, is that the best thing that people who are not Black can do is listen and not just jump into action and take Aunt Jemima off the bottle. And we did a bunch of other things, which I don't really have an opinion on because I'm white. But I don't think that many Black people across the country feel more valuable because we took her off the bottle, or because we took the zippity doo-dah song a la Disney, or because Lady Antebellum changed to Lady A. I don't think any Black people felt better with those actions. However, I
Mm-hmm.
do think that when we were able to do what you said and just listen and not want to defend and not want to cry in front of you, because
Right.
but yes, I'm sad, but the pain is yours. And to be able to
Mm-hmm.
sit in that and practice that gift of presence, I think, is the best advice that I've gotten on this series so far. So I want to
Yeah.
thank you for that. Well, as we close, as I mentioned, you are a fellow podcaster. I would love for you to take 2 to 3 minutes here and tell people about your podcast, about your mission, and where they can find you.
Yeah, so my podcast is called One Faith. You can find it at on social media, everywhere at We Are One Faith. You can find us on all of your podcast streaming platforms. Same thing, We Are One Faith. And the podcast is solely about creating or promoting unity in the body of Christ. Growing up, I grew up Black church all my life. And so I had an experience where I went to a multicultural church, and that really kind of changed the game for me. And I just knew, like, hey, all of God's people need to be worshiping together. And that's really where the birth of One Faith kind of came from, because one thing I recognize is that we are all, unique in our own ways, whether you're Black, white, whatever your, ethnicity is. It is God's intent and design for all of his people to be together, because when we get to heaven, there's not just going to be a Black heaven, there's not going to be a white heaven, there's not going to be an Asian heaven, Hispanic heaven, it's just going to be heaven. And
It's
we're all going to be there.
heaven, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In there, just enjoying the presence of God. And so that's what One Faith is all about. I'm not just talking about that.
Oh,
But,
right. No, but I did. Listen, guys, his podcast is amazing. I will put it in the show notes.
Mhm.
Get ready to put your thinking cap on, though, because this is a podcast that is well thought out and it is biblically sound. And I think that by how amazing TJ has been on this interview, that he is also an amazing podcast host. But the thing I love about him the most, just by listening to just a few of your podcasts, is that jealousy that you have for the souls of Jesus. And so my final question to you, and
Mhm.
is so Captain Obvious, but I call Jesus the star of my story. TJ McKnight, is Jesus the star of your story? Trauma and everything.
If I said no, I don't know if it'll be perceived as a joke. Let me stop. But yes, he is the star of my story, and he is the center of everything that I do. You know, with the podcast, with the now we're transitioning to a young adult ministry. and with everything that we're doing, my intentions is to please God in everything that I do, whether that's being a husband, being a father, being a brother, being a son, being a friend, whatever. All of those titles mean nothing if I'm not representing God in those titles. And so yes, he's the star of my short story. He is the star of my life. He is the star of everything that I do. And I love God with my whole heart. And I just pray that, anyone who is listening, that, hey, if you want to know more about Jesus, if you want to know more about God in any way, feel free to contact me. You can reach out to me via email at admin@weareonefaith.com. If you want to connect with what we're doing, hey, just go follow us or connect with us on Instagram at weareonefaith. Because my hope and my prayer is that I can help you make Jesus the star of your show as
Amen.
well. So
Amen. I love that. And I'll do you one better. I always say to listeners, especially when I have a guest like you, we would love to introduce you to the star of the story. So one of the very first things that you will see in the show notes is contact Amy, contact TJ. And you can do that through DMs. You can send a bird, you can send a plane, but I can promise you that we would love to introduce you to the star of the story. Well, TJ, one of the things I want to say to you, I never leave a microphone, but today it feels especially more powerful to say these words over you because of what you've said to us today and how people who are not marginalized, who have not experienced racial trauma, can be part of the solution by just listening. And here is why we need to listen to you. And TJ, I speak this over you and I speak this over my listeners. Everyone knows I don't leave a microphone without saying it, but right now I am saying it to you, to your wife, to your children, and to your children's children, that you are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and most of all, you are valued. And we will keep listening. We will keep listening. Thank you for being here today, TJ.
Thank you. Thank you. I love it. I love it. Oh, that's amazing.
Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to that incredible conversation that I had with my friend TJ McKnight. I do hope that you gleaned something from it. I know that I certainly did. As we as Christians navigate a world that is often so not kind to everybody, but particularly in marginalized communities, I think that TJ gave us one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever heard, and they just want us to listen. And when we listen, we tell them that they are valuable because they too are made in the image of God. We'll be back here next week with another episode on racial trauma as we are continuing through the month of June. We hope that you will join us. Until then, you know what I'm going to say, just like I just said to TJ. You are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and you are so, so valued. See you guys next week.